Matt, welcome to the Men Made for More podcast. I'm stoked to have you on here today, my man.
Oh, thanks for having me. This has been a long time coming, my friend.
Yeah, we selfishly just wanted to catch up on camera and hit record with it. It's been a long time, but I'm excited to have you on here today.
Oh, so am I. You should have kept that pre-show recording going because I'm sure people would have loved to hear that conversation.
Yeah, we'll keep that one off recording just for the sake of people listening. But for those that are not familiar with you, that aren't following you on media, why don't you give as general of a background as you can for your story, personally and professionally, where you're at and what you're up to?
Mm.
Because I know you have a lot of stuff going on.
Oh, geez, yeah. No, do we have 2 hours to just dive into my background? I'll try and keep this kind of short and sweet, but I tend to get long-winded, so just go ahead and interrupt me if you feel the need to. But I'm just essentially a small town boy who grew up in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. But yeah, I am a doctor of physical therapy, a strength coach. I've been moving with a movement translator, an expert movement translator. It's kind of like my role or designation lately, just to kind of shake things up and to shine a little bit more light into exactly what it is I do. But I grew up in backwoods Pennsylvania, hunting, fishing, shooting, and playing sports at a pretty mediocre level, actually. People look at me like, "Oh, you must have been a great athlete." Nah, I kind of sucked. I grew up in a very athletic family, and that's kind of like where this whole story started with. I grew up in a baseball family, so predominantly baseball. Dad was a left-handed pitcher in college. Mom was actually a collegiate sprinter. Grandfather was actually drafted by the Pirates back in the '60s. So blood and like that short sprinting power athlete type of athleticism was kind of in my blood, or so I thought. So naturally, I kind of gravitated towards trying to impress dad and play baseball. I just wasn't naturally gifted at it, man. I was terrible. Like I had a hard time learning how to throw. I was awkward. I think my brother got all the natural genetic gifts. 4 years younger than me too. You know how like humbling it is, and also frustrating at the same time to watch your younger brother like excel at everything. It's terrible. It's terrible. Like he was the kid that learned how to ride a bike at 4. I was 8 years old when I learned how to ride a bike. Like he was the naturally skinny kid. I was like a character from Heavyweights being yelled at by Ben Stiller. Seriously, like I was that genetic trash can, so to speak. And the only thing that had going for me really was that I was a really hard worker. Like I always wanted to try and impress people. I was kind of a people pleaser back then as a kid, and worked really hard, practicing more, throwing more, batting more, running more, but I just kept getting hurt year after year after year, all these nagging injuries, couldn't seem to keep myself healthy, in and out of physical therapy. And I've broken like dozens of bones in my body. I was kind of like that injury prone kid that everybody talks about. And then I found weight training in high school. And that kind of is where things started to shift for me. I actually grew up in a time period where they thought weight training was bad for baseball players. And we know we couldn't have been more wrong now. Uh, but as you know me, Dave, I kind of go against the grain. I'm kind of like a rogue thinker, I so to speak, I think. And I found the weight room in high school and started falling in love with the weights. And a couple of things happened then is that I realized that if I moved really well and I added a lot of load and resistance to these patterns, that all these nagging injuries seemed to start to disappear. But then it's also the point where I realized that, hey, I'm a much better coach and athlete and a much better provider than a player. And I just loved working with people, loved working with people. I joke that I'm probably the most extroverted introvert there is out there because I need that like alone time to recharge. But I just love being around people, interacting. And so that's kind of where this whole philosophy of movement and strength and conditioning and athletics kind of took root. And I took that philosophy into my athletic training degree at the University of Pittsburgh, and then finally down to get my doctorate from Duke in North Carolina. And it was through Duke that I actually made my way out here to Arizona, having an internship with the Arizona Cardinals. So worked for the Pittsburgh Pirates for a year before going to PT school, and then had an internship with the Cardinals. So I've always been involved in kind of high level sports, and it's been a freaking roller coaster ride, dude. Over the years, from everything working in insurance based clinics, one owned by a PT for the PGA Tour, and eventually then opening up my own practice back in 2016, which is exactly where we met. Then through Danny Matei and his PT entrepreneur mastermind. So I think that was good, wasn't it? Yeah.
I'm
Not too
impressed.
long.
I'm impressed you kept that short. I don't think we hit on everything though, because you have a couple other things
No,
you're still up
no.
to in terms of Olympics and power athlete. You want to give a brief overview on that as well?
Yes, and that's kind of like everything happens for a reason. Like you make decisions that are based off the best information that you have at the time. I think that they do lead you down the path you're supposed to be going down. And excuse me, it was back in 2016 where, I had enough of the insurance-based clinics. I was burnt out only after 2 years. I mean, I was essentially the guy who everybody wanted to come see in the clinic, and people didn't, clinic directors didn't like that. And I was seeing 4 people an hour, and I just couldn't be in that situation anymore, because I realized that it wasn't them. Like, they're great people, it was just a system in and of itself. And I had a much more entrepreneurial mindset than I once thought that I had. So I took a risk and jumped ship and opened up shop in the back of a CrossFit gym, just threw a table back there and started seeing clients. But from that standpoint, it opened the doors for so many different opportunities, because now I had time, right? I had my time back, which is the most valuable, I think, commodity that we have. And it was through having that time that I actually had the opportunity to work with the Power Athlete guys. So John, Luke, and Tex, connected with them. They came out and taught a seminar, became 3 best friends that anyone could have. And just been just been able and been blessed, actually, to be able to write for them and start to develop some programs with them lately. They're out of Austin, Texas, if anybody doesn't know that. But then also around the same time, it was the winter of the year that I opened up my practice, PT mentor of mine, Robert Duvall, who I had through PT school at Duke from Atlanta, Georgia. He actually reached out, and he had done work with our United States Olympic teams back in like the late 80s, early 90s, and asked if I ever had any interest or wanted an opportunity working with these guys and girls. I was like, say less, just who do I need to talk to? Right. So he put me in contact with them, and I guess they liked what I had to say. So I've been working with the United States Olympic team summer sports now for the past 3 years. And I'm specifically traveling around with our United States shooting team. So shotgun, rifle, and pistol, kind of going back to my own roots, growing up in backwoods Pennsylvania. I shot archery for a while, shot a lot of trap and skeet with my dad, and I've always been around guns. So I kind of fell in naturally with their movement patterns and what it exactly was that they were experiencing. And, they were the underserved population, right? They were the ones that were written off. They were not actually considered athletes in many people's eyes. And I'm like, really? These guys and girls have like some of the best hand-eye coordination I've ever seen. I played baseball. Like that's a lot. They got a lot to say. So I was able to make a lot of positive changes with them. So I've been traveling around the world with them for the past 3 years. And, we don't have the Olympics this year because of the whole COVID situation, but we got 2021 in Tokyo coming up. So super excited about that too.
And the team's been, what's the progression of the team been since you've been there and implemented some of those things? I know I've seen, I've at least followed up on your stories and everything, and seeing you got a lot of good athletes there that seem to be improving.
Yeah. And I guess that's like the part of my story that kind of left out, because the perspective that I view movement through the feet. Like, I've been joking now for the past couple of years that I had this kind of low-key foot fetish, but it's really not low-key anymore. It's a major foot fetish, just not in the way that you think it is, because the feet are absolutely the starting point of all human movement, and it's the one thing that connects every single one of us to the ground. And nobody was looking at that in the shooting athletes, and not just the shooting athletes. I'm talking all sports, but that's kind of where I started with these men and women, and it started to make a lot of positive changes, because I was changing the way that they were directing the forces and the ground reaction forces and the energy through their feet. So we started getting them into a more low profile shoe and teaching them how to actually feel the feet and shift weight, which has direct translation up into how they move the gun. Even more so specifically with the shotgun shooters, who have a lot of rotational requirements of them in their sport. So I was able to make a lot of quick changes, because it's a low-hanging fruit. You make a small little change in the feet and have a large trickle up, I guess, effect in this case to the rest of the body. And we saw a lot of rates of injury go down, pain presentations go down, and a lot of performance increase. We've got some guys and girls that are now moving on to their 3rd and 4th Olympics in a row, which is just absolutely amazing. And they're shooting some of the best scores in their lives.
It's so cool to see. And the feet being such a big piece of that. I know we want to dive deep into that. There's one other thing in your background, though, I'm just personally curious about. And you mentioned this thing in high school of kind of getting into weights. What were you self-taught at that time, or where did some key mentors enter the picture in terms of, was it just self-learn and hustling on the T Nation articles, or was it what did you have a mentor step in your life, or someone kind of in that high school or college phase?
I want to thank you for this, because nobody's ever asked me that question before. But one of my very earliest memories is actually as a toddler, I think, going to this grungy old gym with my dad. That's kind of where this whole love for the weight started. Like I vividly remember climbing up and down all the machines and like the decline benches and all that. And I think so that just kind of like naturally stuck with me. So there was that like affinity for it for when I found it in high school. But like I'll be completely 100% honest with you too, Dave. It wasn't just the performance benefits that I was after. Remember, I was that fat kid, right? So I saw weight training as a way to transform my body. And let's be honest, what does every dude want to do in high school? It's the 10,000 reps of bench press. You want to try to impress the ladies, right? That's what I was after. And I just so happened to see all these positive benefits come afterwards with, not getting hurt and actually getting stronger and moving better. But as far as like a mentors were concerned, God love my high school football coaches, but they were not the best weight coaches. Um, they're very transactional in nature. What I mean by that is they required you to hit a certain number. Like I vividly remember I was a defensive lineman at 180 pounds. I was fast though, so just keep that in mind. At 180 pounds, we had a requirement. If we wanted to start the defensive line, we had a back squat 315, right? It wasn't like, okay, you're moving 275 really fast and powerfully. It's no, you have to back squat 315 is the only way you're going to start. So of course, what do we do? Come hell or high water, we were throwing 315 in the bar and see if we can squat it once. And it looked like dog shit, but it didn't matter because the weights were all that mattered to those coaches. So it really, really wasn't until me getting to undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh and falling into, I guess my first side hustle as a male model, where I started taking the strength and conditioning game a little bit more seriously, and yeah, reading all of Muscle and Fitness and T Nation, and really just trying to soak up any knowledge that I could. But I was also comparing that with my knowledge and my education that I was getting from the athletic training program. Like University of Pittsburgh had a pretty solid strength game there, and I can't remember the strength coach's name when I was there, but he's the one who inspired me to look deeper into like biomechanics and how the body actually functions under load and learning how to create tension and pressure. And actually back then they were talking about the feet, but not to the capacity that we are now. So that's kind of I guess where all the light bulb moments started going off and really just propelled me. And dude, like I've been through so many different phases and seasons of my life when it comes to all this weight training and athleticism stuff. I mean, I went from the team sports in high school to the whole aesthetics bodybuilding game, all the way through powerlifting and CrossFit, and then back into the power athlete stuff and training like an athlete again, into now more of this. I don't know if you've been seeing what I've been doing on the grams lately, but I got a little thing called Project Balls to the Floor. So I'm really trying to learn to control my joints through the fullest range of motion possible, going after these middle, forward, backward splits and some really crazy, feats of human strength with an iron cross and a single arm pull up and different handstand variations and handstand push-ups in the middle of the room. So very much more calisthenic based. But the thing that ties them all together are the lessons learned, right? There were some valuable lessons I learned in every single one of those phases that looking back on now just kind of really set the trajectory into what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I love it and appreciate you sharing that. And I genuinely mean this, Matt. You're one of the people from the performance movement side of things that I look up to the most in terms of just this complete picture, just because I think of your diverse background where there's some people that can respect in certain sides of that. There's some people that, value aesthetics more. And there's some people that just are like, here's how to push as much weight. And then there's the people a little more maybe in just like the body control or the mobility side of it. And you seem to have this unique blend around all those. And I think, is that kind of all those things kind of morphed into what you teach today?
Yeah. So I've taken, I think, a little bit from every single one of them. And I live by a Bruce Lee quote that is empty your cup. So always be like a continual learner. So empty your cup to be able to take in new information and to utilize what's useful to you and discard the rest. But in order to do so, I think you need to have, your own awareness of where you're going and your purpose and your values in life and, your philosophy on things. And you're able to then integrate all the different little facets and nuances of these different disciplines to really become a more holistic provider and practitioner. And that's kind of what I've been striving for over the years, because it's like you always have that imposter syndrome phenomenon going on where you kind of feel like you're not good enough in a certain space, but you're really good enough exactly where you are, as long as you just continue to know that you're not going to know everything and be okay with that and acknowledge it and just continue to push the needle forward. But I think that's one of the biggest problems with, this age of information that we live in, especially on like all the different social medias. There's a lot of Instagram porn out there where you're seeing a lot of stuff that's being portrayed, but it's all out of context. And it's tough to take that information because, I think we're so used to being taught nowadays that we don't ever actually learn anything, right? There's so much information, nobody ever applies it. All right. And I think that's where we start to run into problems. And it does start to give you that feeling of the imposter syndrome because you see all these other people doing so many different things. But there is something that you can learn from them if you just dive a little bit deeper. But the key is you actually have to apply it. And I think that that's what I've been so good at. Is I've put myself through the ringer and put myself through the fire through experience and being able to test out all these different modes and disciplines of movement and then utilize what I feel is right for that person that I'm seeing from an athlete or client standpoint.
Yeah, testing on yourself, testing on other people, and I think that's your experience speaks for itself. But I know Instagram that's the whole reason I got a little bit away from Instagram, a little more into podcasting, is because Instagram's so incomplete with our thoughts and people. You spend all this time, and I'm sure you've seen it, pouring into a post and writing the stuff, and someone just sees the image, likes it, and goes on, and it's a harder place to educate in that sense. And that's why I'm excited to have you on here. But one other, where did I know you're one to ruffle feathers and kind of go against the grain, like you said, is that something that's always been there for you too? Or is that something, cause that takes some, like you said, imposter syndrome can get in the way of that. A lack of confidence can get in the way of speaking out on stuff. What, is that something that's always been there? Or is that something you kind of developed over time?
Oh, that's actually really good. Because growing up, I was always the kid who did what he was told type of thing. Especially from like my parents. I was like the star child I guess as I was older, I had my priorities in line. Like I was always a straight A student. I always made sure I had my tasks and assignments done on time. And my little brother kind of went against the grain on that standpoint. So I was always a conformer. And this dives deep into like my own personal history with things as well, and with the past few years of what I've been through from a relationship standpoint and whatnot. But I was always trying to be something that everybody else wanted me to be, and that ended like 4 years ago. Right. So I started to be like, I need to listen to my own self, right? I need to listen to what I believe and what my brain is telling me, my heart is telling me, what my gut is telling me, and just to start to make decisions based off of those and not care what other people think. And I've been living by this mantra also the past couple of years, is to be unapologetically authentic to myself, right? And I'm going to say things that I want to say. I'm going to let you know about my opinion, and I'm not going to sugarcoat shit. And if we align and we work well together, that's great. If not, it's okay too, and I don't take offense to it. And then that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, like, we're not going to please everybody, right? So I guess to answer your question, David, I was never really that go against the grain type. I think that it was something that was always inside of me. I just had to cultivate it and bring it out. And I can tell you right now that I have never been happier with things. But also, I have some of the best relationships and the best fucking community around me now, because we are all and it doesn't have to be like-minded to the point where we all think alike, but that we all respect each other. And that's the most valuable component of it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's because I think a lot of people maybe don't want to necessarily go against the grain, but they bottle up opinions for the same way. And I've been the same way. Like I said, conformer. It's, I was always the kid growing up too, that my older brother was more of a screw up growing up. So I became the, older one in a sense, and always had the grades in line and more straight edge in nature. And I think it's hard though to break through that. And it sounds like you've gotten there, but is that I want to dive a little deeper on, is that like a one-time decision of like, hey, I'm just going to start doing this? Because a lot of people in theory, they're like, yeah, I hear that. I would love to do that. But is it just a series of small decisions? Is it like, I made up my mind one day and I'm just doing this?
Yeah, there was a made up my mind type of a moment that I had, but it was definitely a just grouping of small decisions over time. It's like anything else, Dave. It's an evolution, and it takes reps and it takes practice. And that's kind of where that unapologetic authenticity mantra came in. It's like, if I ever was in a situation and I was, waffling back and forth of what kind of decision I wanted to make, I just came back to that, and I need to stay true to who I was. But that actually came from a lot of self-development work that I did a number of years ago, to really like sit down with my own thoughts. You know how fucking scary that is? That's so fucking terrifying, to actually sit with your own thoughts and actually and actually acknowledge them and understand what they're telling you and why they're in your head. I think it's the same thing with pain and stuff too. I think we deal with so much pain, whether it be physical or emotional. We never take time to actually sit with it. Because I was in a lot of emotional pain a number of years back as well, and it's something that I had to work through. And it wasn't until I kind of like I broke the shackles of trying to be something that I wasn't, that I was able to essentially set myself free and have the confidence. I think that was the key, was to have the confidence in myself to know that I was making these decisions based on the values that I have instilled in myself. And I wrote them down too. I've got a whole entire couple pages of like paragraphs that I wrote to myself of my purpose, what I wanted to achieve in this life, and essentially my guardrails that I set up myself, and the non-negotiables that I set into place, that are the pillars of my life, and kind of hold me accountable to my own decision making.
And that is so good. And I've actually recently started doing the same things, and non-negotiables, and the, laying out a mission, vision for life, laying out like what are our core values. We talk about all the time for business, but we never really define that in our life. And do you want to give just a brief overview? You want to give like a quick rundown of that? Because I think listeners would benefit from hearing just kind of how you structured that if they're looking to do something similar.
From the non-negotiable standpoint.
Yeah, just your kind of how you laid out those
Mm-hmm.
couple pages.
In the beginning, there was no structure to it. It was just
Gotcha.
like free form writing and thought. But then I distilled it down into the things that bring me joy, right? But from a business standpoint, it's the things that make you money or bring you joy. Um, there's that component of it as
Yep.
well. So let's be truthful about it. But from a personal standpoint, it was the things that bring me joy and give me energy. If they didn't provide me joy, if they weren't that hell yes moment for me, they were gone. So one of them was like, and I don't know, just if people give people like a background, like when we met, I was married once before, and I've since gone through a divorce. And that's kind of where all this started for me, is I was able to sit down with that and finally realize what I wanted. But that went back from a whole series of past conditioning from parents, of like watching them get married at a young age. So, I thought I was behind the eight ball when I got to PT school. So I found somebody that looked good on paper. And then once I met them, I was engaged within 9 months, and it's like hindsight 2020, dummy. Come on, that wasn't the right decision to make there. But it was because I thought that that's what I was supposed to be doing, not exactly what I wanted to be doing. But to answer the question too, so I kind of sat down. I was like, well, what things bring me the most joy in life? And then when I'm looking for a partner to share those experiences with, they need to be able to also share in those non-negotiables. So I came up with a bunch of them, including like a healthy lifestyle, like a movement practice. That was number one for me. Like, they have to be active, right? I'm a very active dude. I'm doing something movement oriented every single damn day, and it's a high priority for me. So I'm not going to be with somebody who just likes to go to the bar every night and get loaded and not be able to, wake up and go do a workout or go on a hike or something like that. Wasn't going to happen. Like, another very important thing for me was growing up in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. I'm a little redneck, right? You know that. You can't see it right now with all my long hair that I've grown out since the last time that we saw each other. But like, I grew up hunting and fishing and being in the woods and camping. And so that's part of me. Like, that's part of who I am. And I didn't need necessarily somebody to be out there shooting deer, but I needed somebody to actually respect the fact that that is what I'd like to do, and I enjoy doing it. And just a quick side story, like my partner Kendall now, she was back home with me for Thanksgiving last year, and I shot a 7-point buck, and she asked if she can come help or actually watch, like skin it and break it down and quarter it and cut out all the meat and everything. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then we get there, and she's like, can I help? I'm like, oh shit, you want this knife? You want to like skin the deer with me? Okay, go for it. So my uncle's over there, like teaching her the lines to cut and everything. And I'm watching this, like my heart is just filling with so much happiness and joy. I see my dad with the biggest smile on his face, and like she's going to town on this deer. And I got like this sinking, like sickening feeling of fear, because I'm like, holy shit, she's really good with a knife. Like, not
Look
gonna
out.
make her mad.
Yeah.
But it's stuff like that that it makes things easy, dude. It really, because if you know what it is that you want, right, and you've actually taken the time to think about it and write it down, it makes everything else moving forward that much easier. Because now you have a system. It's just like with business. We develop these systems and processes. When you have a system in place for your relationships too, and make sure they're going to be successful. Like, are there bumps in the road? Yeah, of course there are. But that difference comes down to the communication aspect and that natural level of respect that I alluded to earlier with the community that I have now.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think the intentionality is lacking from so many people of it, they're just, kind of pinballing through life of and whether that's, we can get into fitness, obviously we can get into anything though, but if you're
Mm-hmm.
not really sure on the direction you're heading and you're just kind of like, oh, I'll try this today and then I'll kind of try this thing or see if this works, and you don't really know what you're looking for, it makes it really hard to achieve goals if you don't know what those goals are, and whether you call it goals, just values, whatever you want to say, it's important to be heading the right direction.
It's yeah, right. And essentially what happens, I'm sure you can relate to this. I feel like we all get in our own way sometimes. Like, we set up these these roadblocks or barriers to our own success, and we're our own worst enemy. So just like a quick little side tangent story that's going to kind of tie all that together, because you had alluded to it about where I started to make this pivot and this transition in my life. And this was actually on my very first trip with the Olympics. So we've talked about this before, Dave. I know I've had conversations with you where sometimes we feel like we're on an island, right? If you've ever had that feeling, you're going to be able to relate to this, because you feel isolated, you feel alone. And we've talked about this from the PT standpoint of like, hey, we're doing things so differently that sometimes we do feel isolated and alone, like we are on our own island. And it's like, are we fucking crazy out here on this island? But my very first trip with the Olympics was actually on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean called Malta. And I was still married back then. And, the relationship was kind of on the rocks a little bit. And there was like talk going back and forth and fighting and all that. And there were actually like divorce papers presented, the whole 9 yards. And I go to this island and I'm alone, right? So I'm legitimately by myself, like away from my wife. But during this trip, I realized like how much joy I had. I was on this island working with these athletes. I was so fucking passionate. I was fired up. I was waking up with like 4 hours of sleep and full of energy. And guess what happened? The days that got closer and closer and closer to her coming, I became more depressed. I became sadder. My athletes and my coaches noticed it. Like, where did all your energy go to? Like, where's all the fire like you've been having? And I realized then and there that something needed to change. So from a personal standpoint, it's like that was the moment I realized I needed to get a divorce. But then this island also had a little bit more significance in that it completely changed the trajectory of the confidence that I built in myself. Because while I was there working with my athletes, I started getting athletes from other countries that tried to come over and work with me. And granted, they brought their own PTs, their own massage therapists, their own athletic trainers with them, but they saw that I was doing something different. And I didn't know it back then. Like, I was just, doing what I do on a daily basis with clients here in Arizona. And I realized that for the first time, a lot of these athletes were finally being heard, because I would sit with them, I would talk with them, I'd get to know them, I'd learn their history, I'd learn about their families and what they enjoy and their movement practices outside of the shooting game. And then instead of actually using my hands to like quote unquote fix them, I would help them fix themselves through movement. And I was like, holy shit, there was like the light bulb moment, the epiphany. I was like, I'm different. This is why I feel like I'm on an island, is because I literally am doing things so differently, but it had to switch the perspective, Dave. And this is where I switched it. Instead of feeling isolated and feeling alone, I was going to start calling people to my island. I fucking discovered this island, right? Just like you discovered your own island with what you do out there in San Diego. And I got to start calling people to it. And more people come, and then we'll start to develop this community. And guess what? Now it's not so alone. So that metaphorical island that I thought that I was on became the reality of the island that I was legitimately on in the middle of the Mediterranean, that shifted the trajectory for me and now pushed me forward into exactly what it is I am doing now with all the momentum and steam behind it.
Yeah, I love that. That is so good. And I love that analogy and that story, because it's, people listening, they might be, I didn't know where we were going to go with this conversation. I love every bit of it, but because it's so relevant, we were going to talk things about movement and feet and building your foundation and doing different things, which are super important. But the reason that people seek out the information on a podcast, the reason people seek out things is because what do they really want? They want to feel strong. They want to feel confident. They don't want to feel like they're on an island. They want to feel like they have purpose. And whether you're dealing with pain or an injury, whether you're not as, fit as you want to be, not looking as good, it's like all these things we're talking about are the foundation that allow you to build confidence. And I think you and I would both agree movement's an incredible way to help build more of that confidence and build that. And, how are you bringing this up with people you're working with now in terms of, because there's people hopefully can see there's so many underlying things to all this, an injury, a pain, a lack of confidence. This is just layers and layers. Are you directly addressing this? Do you have a process for doing that, or what, how are you kind of shedding light on this for people and using movement as a way to kind of step into that underlying all the psychological, emotional side of everything too?
Oh yeah. Yes. So I do have my own process, my process of movement discovery, I call it. So I generally have a name for it now. But it's something that I've been doing for years, just never put it into any structure, I guess, so to speak. But it's what I teach in the mentorship programs that I offer and everything like that too. It all boils down to communication. Like what we're doing right now, we're having a conversation today. This is how we can dispel information, but it's also how we develop trust, rapport, and connection with each other. Like it is, I think we take it for granted. Like the communication side of things is a very, very integral piece. And we take it for granted because we think that because we're talking every day and conversing with people that we're communicating, but we're not communicating effectively, right? Because many of us, and myself included, I was right there a while back too, are terrible listeners. Like we want to just be able to, speak our own mind, our own opinions, and not actually listen to what other people are telling us and be able to reframe that, reflect that back to them. And in doing so, that's how you actually start to develop trust. So what I talk about when I'm working with clients or helping other practitioners or coaches develop this skill is I talk about developing a container, right? And this container is the safe space that you are holding for that person that you're working with or in communication with or trying to help move better or move through that pain experience. And the container is built by a couple of different pillars to it. So you can think about it any way you want. It's a glass container, a box, whatever. But the foundation is being a good listener through questions, like through asking very open-ended, detailed questions that allow that individual to tell their story, right? And then the other piece of that component is through being very present. And that is people know you're being present with them when you're capable of reframing what it is that they just told you and putting it into another question. So you should always feel like you are the question asker to allow people to talk more. People want to feel heard, they want to feel seen. And then the last one in that is through the actual listening component of it. And through all three of those pillars, we developed this container, and the lid to that container is opened with trust. So once you start developing, the rapport with them and connecting with them and diving deeper into their history and diving deeper into their story, so to speak, like we're all storytellers, right? Like that's all we want to do is tell stories. It's how we communicate knowledge and information. That's how we communicate emotion as well, which is super valuable. Once you're able to develop trust, you can then open up that container, which is exactly where all the physical, the emotional, the psychological transformation occurs. So that's the foundation of it all, right? That's where it is all completely laid out and built, because I could develop the most robust, efficient, effective program for them. I could pick apart their movement. I could tell them everything that they're doing wrong, give them the exact plan that they need to fix their shit. But if they don't trust me, it's not going to be useful for them. They're never going to do any of it, right? At the end of the day, like I tell this to my clients all the time, like I'm not going to fix you. You're going to fix yourself. But if they don't trust me to guide them along the way, then I'm going to take the action necessary to do so. So you need to be able to build that foundation first, and then you can start to talk about the differences with the pain sciences and going into all the movement stuff and start to develop a good strength program on top of that. And they're going to be bought in. They're going to be bought in because you took the time in the beginning to actually listen to them and connect with them. I see people on a 90-minute basis. That's the minimum I'll see people on. And the first 45 minutes of that is just talking. Like we literally sit here and have a powwow and get to know each other. It's like being out at a bar having a drink. And that's what it should feel like.
I think it's so important. And for anyone looking for any kind of healing practitioner or strength coach or anyone that they're looking for, I think that's, got to be a piece of it. If you're just going and following a generic online program, you find, or even a specific one that someone makes for you based on, a general movement assessment or something, without really getting to know what makes you tick and your goals and all those things, you're going to always fall short. And if you find yourself bouncing around from program to program and thing to thing, that might be the thing that's missing, is someone who's actually hearing you and knowing what you need and what your goals are and why they're important, and being able to tap into that a little bit is such a missing piece, I think, for coaches.
Mm-hmm. Totally. It's like the shiny new object syndrome, right? Like, oh, this looks great. It's like a squirrel, a dog chasing a squirrel. You jump from program to program to program. You never see any results. You never put the amount of energy and effort necessary to see any success in that program.
Yeah. And it's, we see that all the time, but I wanted to, one thing I do want to get on the foundation side of things. You mentioned the word foundation a few times, and you mentioned, there's the foundation on the like confidence side of things, from the, having confidence in yourself, and then movement confidence as well. And I know you kind of compare, feet as the foundation, and then also the foundation of confidence as, the way we're carrying ourselves. And do you, how are you, for those that don't know the importance of the feet, because I do want to get into this, like, where are you starting people on this, and how is that their foundation? Because a lot of people say your core is your foundation, or, lats can be, people throw these big muscle groups around glutes and these things, but why do you start with the feet for people, and how does that even look?
Oh, Dave, we couldn't get through the entire conversation without having a conversation about feet, could we?
It's your
Like,
thing, man.
I know, I try so hard. Yeah, so the feed for me is based off of my own kind of personal history with things. So I mentioned I was a baseball player for a long time. I was playing sports from the age of 4. My dad threw me into t-ball and soccer at that age, so I was in cleats the majority of my adolescence. Very important developmental timestamp in a young athlete's life. And what ended up happening is I started to develop these duck feet. So I ran around and walked like a duck. I had essentially flippers. I didn't have feet. Like, if you looked at somebody like, oh, they got flat feet, I was that guy. Like, I'm talking like full on collapse and those things. It didn't help that I was actually born with something called tibial torsion on my right side. So that also contributed to it. And it's like, pros and cons of growing up in backwoods Pennsylvania. Docs told my parents that I would grow out of it. And it's like, yeah, well, maybe if we actually did anything about it in the beginning, you might have grown out of it, but you just kind of let it go. So now that's kind of like a permanent thing. So if you ever like watch me move, I do have like a slight rotation in my right leg. So it's just an interesting little nuance about me. But it was because of that I ended up finding out where was the root cause of all my pain issues, right? Moving on up the chain. When I got to PT school and started connecting the dots and putting the pieces together, I realized the foot was kind of like any other part of the human body, just like your biceps. You can make it stronger. And I started to essentially wean myself out of the big cushiony shoes and custom orthotics. Parents, God bless them, they were doing what they thought was best for me, and put me in all the big cushiony shoes and orthotics that money could buy, which would help temporarily. But as we know, then it was just a bad Band-Aid, and things kept getting worse. I started experiencing more and more plantar fasciitis symptoms, Achilles issues, knee issues, hip issues, low back problems, like recurring flare-ups 3 or 4 times a year. And there was no amount of like mobilizing the shit out of my hips or deadlifting that was going to take that away, because I never fixed the foundation of which I was standing on, which is my feet. And I was essentially deadlifting and moving around in platform shoes, essentially what it was. And my feet had no function. They were functioning like pegs. And when I started to put things together in PT school, I decided that I was going to take the time necessary to fix my feet. And over a 3-year time span, I went from a size 12.5 to a size 10.5 shoe. So I essentially took my duck flippers and turned them into a normal semblance of what a foot should look and function like. Now, granted, the architecture is still a bit lower than most. My feet are very responsive in nature, and they work very, very well now. So that's kind of where the whole entire, I guess, love for working with the feet started, was actually fixing my own. And it is the very first assessment that I do on everybody. It doesn't matter if you're coming to me with a knee issue or a shoulder problem. We always start and look at the feet, because it is the beginning of the kinetic chain. It literally transmits every single piece of information and movement potential up the rest of the body. It literally tells our brain how we need to navigate our environment, whether that be in the weight room or out on the field. We need to know what's going on at the feet. And I always use John Welborn, the power athlete's definition of athleticism, to explain this, is that we need to be able to combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task. That is athleticism. We need to be able to accomplish these known and novel tasks seamlessly and effortlessly. That's like watching the NFL wide receiver run down the sideline while staving off defenders and turning his head to catch a ball 7 yards down the field. That's athletic. Like, he wasn't thinking about that shit. His brain knew exactly how he needed to react, right? So that seamless and effortless movement is, and combining those primal movement patterns through space, is your proprioception and kinesthetic awareness. You develop your sense of balance and where your body is at in space by developing the foot and the proprioceptive capability of the feet, strength of the foot. And once that foot can actually transmit better information to the brain, that's how you improve your movement pattern to become more athletic. And that's what gives the brain the sense of control back over your body.
Yeah, it's foreign to a lot of people, but it's, so applicable. And well, I know you would argue that everyone needs to work on their feet. Who are the ones especially that should be? I know you mentioned flat feet. Are there any other things you would highlight in terms of people that should be like, hey, maybe I should consider this?
I would literally say everybody, because people look at the feet and they think that the high arch is like the gold standard. Not the case. Like, just because you have a high arch doesn't mean your foot actually functions well. Like, you still need to become a mobile adapter at some point. Like, your foot still needs to be able to flatten into pronation. Like, pronation is not the fucking boogeyman. It's not going to come get you in the middle of the night. It's not the source of all your injuries. Just as much as a high arch isn't the gold standard, right? Having a high arch that's too rigid and super like stuck in its ways means you cannot reduce forces. When does most injury occur? When you're reducing force, so when you're slowing down at the end range of motion, right? So if you can't do that, you can't attenuate forces, the forces are going to bleed somewhere, and hence there comes a torn meniscus, an ACL or a hamstring strain, or even a low back problem. And you actually see this a lot in high level athletics. And this is like, one of the lessons that I learned, going back to full circle of like all my different seasons in life, going through like the whole bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit side of things, is I was able to develop a really big fucking engine, like a giant engine. I essentially had a Ferrari inside my hips and pelvis. That's not a joke. Essentially, I was pretty good. I was pretty athletic. I was strong. I was powerful. I could have taken that. We'll keep it PG. So I developed a Ferrari engine inside my chassis, my hips and my pelvis and my trunk, but I had Pintos as feet. All right, so they became the weak link in the chain, and I wasn't able to transmit the ground reaction forces effectively and efficiently through the rest of my body. And that's when I started to develop a lot more of these, these issues in the knee and the hip and the low back, because that force was going elsewhere. And we see this a lot in the high level athletics, especially like it was highly evident this year with the NFL because of all the, the lockdowns and not being able to practice as much. I can't tell you, I think 90% of the injuries we saw up to week 3 were high ankle sprains, ACLs, hamstring strains, and groin issues. Guess where that's all coming from? The feet. We essentially have had these like immobile feet locked into a tight athletic shoe that, not to mention, was athletically taped around there to limit more motion. And then we limited even more motion by taping over the shoe and around the ankle. We got these very, very Ferrari-like engines running around on Pinto feet again. So if anything is kind of skewed where that force needs to go somewhere, like, listen, force can either be created or destroyed. We know this. It's a law of physics. It's got to go somewhere. So if you can't attenuate it through the feet, it's going to go up into that syndesmosis joint in between the ankle. There's your high ankle sprain. It's going to bleed out into the knee. There's your ACL tear. It's going to go up into the hip. There's your groin injury. All right. It's going to happen somewhere. Sorry, I don't know if I kind of went off track from your question.
No, that was perfect, because I figured you'd say everyone, but that was an even better answer too, in terms of kind of piecing that all together, how that looks. And I know for some people listening, they're like, is it as simple as training barefoot? Like, is just being barefoot more the only way to do it, or is there a more specific approach, I guess, for people starting out?
Yeah, as much as I would love to say that just going barefoot is the answer, it'll get you a good start. It definitely will. But you also have to be able to teach your feet to adapt to the environment. So the foot has 26 bones, 33 joints in it. I think it's like somewhere around like 107 ligaments. So there's a lot going on down there, a lot of like structures holding everything together. It's a very dynamic structure inside the body. Like Da Vinci said it was a work of art. And that's going back, I don't know, arts history, but way, way back, where even he noticed that. And with 33 joints in each foot, that's 66 total. Your spine also has 33 joints, but you got 2 feet. So I almost say the feet is actually more important than your spine and what's going on there, and actually directs what's going on at the spine. But those joints each have 3 degrees of freedom to them. So I'm gonna let you do the math on it. It teaches how to do math at Duke. So I'm gonna let you guys figure that one out. But there's a lot of degrees of freedom at the foot. So we always talk about the human body being able to move in 3 different planes of motion. Well, the foot can also move in 3 different planes of motion through those 33 different joints. There's a lot going on there. And, you know, the degree to where you need to start, where you need to start training your foot can be barefoot. I think it's a great place, but the degree of where you need to go with it is going to be dependent on so many different variables were you in cleats your entire life like I was? Are you used to wearing Hoka shoes? I mean, here's the big problem, Dave, is that we've essentially made ourselves very, very pressure void in life. Like, think about this for a hot second. We have a pillow for our head when we sleep at night. We got a cushion for our ass when we're sitting down. And we got giant cushiony shoes we walk around in all day. Okay. Now, what do we typically do when we're in pain? We hire people to put pressure back into the freaking system. Once again, am I crazy? Am I on an island? We hire masseuses, we put lacrosse balls in the bottom of our foot, roll around on foam rollers, all to add pressure back to the system. Well, what if we just added pressure into the system from the get-go and taught our feet actually how to use it appropriately? I think we'd solve a lot of problems. But essentially, when it comes to the injuries, it's not just about going barefoot. You also have to be able to transmit forces, and that becomes a vibration problem. So our feet, the bottom of our feet, have sensory receptors called mechanoreceptors and proprioceptors that are found nowhere else in the body but in the bottom of the feet and the hands. It's inside what we call glabrous skin. It's hairless skin, and 70% of these mechanoreceptors are what we call fast adapting. So they're fast acting mechanoreceptors that detect high vibrational forces like walking, running, jumping, those types of things, versus the slow adapting ones where if like I'm standing still right now talking to you, those little receptors are kind of keeping me upright and balanced, postural sway, 2-point discrimination, that type of stuff. So a lot of Achilles issues, a lot of plantar fasciitis problems, a lot of knee problems are all related to the inability of the receptors to actually work appropriately, because we only ever adapt those receptors to the cushion of the shoe and never to any other type of environment. So different things like carpet, hardwood, tile, concrete, grass, gravel, all sends different vibratory sensory information up to the brain and tells it what to do differently. So it's important to be able to stimulate the bottom of your feet in as many different environments as possible, but then also to be able to learn how to move the joints through those 3 different planes of motion in a variety of different patterns as possible. This is why training barefoot is so important. And there are ways that you can start to do that through different, various exercises and movements that I have people do on a regular basis to start to 1, knock the rust off, but then 2, teach the foot to be stronger, more mobile, and transmit forces better. I joke all the time, it's kind of ironic. I spent the majority of my young life trying to get, bigger, faster, stronger to impress girls and become more muscular and more aesthetically pleasing. But I've never been happier until the day that I got compliments on how muscular and veiny my feet look. I was like, I finally made it, guys. We did it.
Full circle back into it. One more question on the feet, a selfish question I have, because I grew up in cleats too. And I'm super bow legged. My ankle joints don't move. My feet were flat. I also lost a size and a half on my shoe once I started building the things back up. But for those with ankle mobility, I worked at it, man. It was a few years too of solid work at it. But for those with ankle mobility limitations, I think ankle mobility is such a big, for those that are, kind of proactive on things. People are like, oh, I want to squat better. Just, mob your ankles and, ankles, hips. How does the feet tie into that? Do you address the feet first to improve ankle mobility, or do you need to improve ankle? Because a lot of people will say, well, until you improve your ankle mobility, you can't really fix your feet because they're going to have to compensate. Where's your stance on that?
Oh, I call bullshit on that, number one. So 2 things. Number one, I consider myself a recovering mobtard. There's another PT of mine. Nick Kyle out of West Virginia. He and I are good friends, and he coined that term. So Nick, if you're listening, I'm stealing it from you right now. But essentially, I was one of those guys who would try to mobilize the shit out of everything, right? Until you start to look at how the nervous system really works. And the mobilization isn't actually doing what we think it's doing. Like, you're not actually moving the joints. You're just adding a lot of deep pressure that's stimulating like the GTOs and the muscle spindles inside the joint and inside the musculotendinous units that make you feel like you have more range. But when it comes to joints in the foot and the ankle included, it's a neurological problem. So if the brain feels like it can't control the range of motion through a joint, what's it going to do? It's going to lock it up. It's going to give you these sensations of tightness and immobility in an effort to protect you. You know, whether right or wrong, if it feels like you are going to potentially hurt yourself, as a defense mechanism, it won't let you go there, right? So the ankle's included. Like, if you feel like you can't get enough ankle dorsiflexion range of motion to squat well, you have to start teaching your feet how to control that range of motion, meaning you need to be able to train barefoot so that you can stimulate those receptors, so you can get the muscles to function the way they need to, so you can actually move through these different ranges. And guess what? Then the ankle will start to open up because your brain feels like it actually has control of it again. If you don't ever do that, you're gonna be fighting this battle, man. I did it for 4 years. 4 years. I did all of the loaded mobility drills out there. I'm talking 45 minutes to an hour a day, and got nowhere. Some temporary, maybe a little bit of perceived increased range of motion that allowed me to feel like I was working out better or more efficiently, but it never stuck. And it wasn't until I started training barefoot and teaching the joints to go through their fullest range of motion and making my brain feel comfortable and okay with doing it, that I started to open it up, and the stuff started to last for good and stay around for good. So that's the key. Like, we talk all the time about compensation patterns, and yes, that stuff is important, but you have to get to the root cause of why the compensation patterns are, developing in the first place. And when it comes to the foot and ankle, you have to stimulate those areas. You have to be okay with kind of messing up a little bit here and there. It's how your brain learns, right? That's how you can learn from mistakes to be able to adapt and grow and evolve.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you hit on the mobility side of it, because it is so people just think like, oh, something feels stiff, so I'm just going to start hammering it with a band and a lacrosse ball and foam roller and just smash it and do everything they can to try and help it improve. But as you and I have both seen, that's short-term, very short-lived stuff, if even much improvement at all, very temporary, but they're not even following it up with doing the right things to strengthen the right areas and give that sensory feedback. Yeah.
It's essentially, it's the difference between intention and impact. Like, I think people who are doing that and continue to do it, you've got great intentions. Like, you understand there's a problem and you're trying to change it, but the impact that you're having is not exactly what you think that is occurring. It's the same thing when I get people that come in and they're like, well, I do squats and deadlifts and I do step ups and lunges. It's like, okay, well, how are you doing them? It goes back to the whole entire John Wooden quote, which I absolutely love. So John Wooden, if nobody knows, he was the winningest most basketball coach in history. UCLA, passed away a number of years ago now, but he has my favorite quote of all time, and it's don't mistake activity for achievement. So just because you're doing something doesn't mean you're actually accomplishing anything, right? You may be having these great intentions of, improving your ankle mobility, but if you don't have the right impact, you're never going to make the change that you want.
That's so good. I love that John Wooden quote, and the intention over impact too is so good too, because most people do have good intentions. They're trying to improve. They're just running into the wall, banging their head in the wall, trying to do the same things that aren't working, versus they could spend less time getting more results if they're willing to do that in a smart way.
Well, it's just like finding the right guide, but bang your head against the wall is the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah. No, that's also good, Matt. I appreciate all this. I got a couple questions coming your way to wrap up here, but I'm so glad that the way that conversation went, we were both like, we're just going to hit record and see what happens. But it's been a blast. And a couple questions that ask all the guests as we wrap up here is one, and I already appreciate your vulnerability on, some of your past and where you've kind of, struggled and where you seen some turnaround, because I think a lot of people listening, they hear someone well-spoken, they hear someone that's doing all these things, and it's easy from the outside to look and be like, man, this guy's got it all together. He's confident, he's happy, he's doing all these things, he's successful, he's got multiple businesses, he's teaching other coaches now. And that, that can be a dangerous place for guys listening, because it creates this, again, they get this imposter syndrome then of like, well, I'm not there. He's doing this, he's doing that. And, I think you and I would both be the first to admit that that's definitely not the case. But what's for those listening, if you can be vulnerable in a challenge you're currently facing, I know you've mentioned some of the past things, but is there anything you're going through now that's growing you, that's challenging you, something you're struggling with that you're working through that you believe is going to end up being a catalyst for your growth as a man?
Yeah, I think you nailed it right in the head. Like, that's such an important and valuable piece of information that people need to hear more often, is that we all are not perfect. Like, it may look like that on the exterior, but you never know what's going on inside somebody. And for me, I definitely am a confident individual, and that definitely portrays on the outside, but it's not always the thoughts that are going on inside my head. People think that when you become a PT with the Olympics, like you've reached this pinnacle, or if you're doing all these businesses and you made this amount of money, you've reached this end point, but it was never an end point. And guess what? I am here going to be the first one to tell you that even with the success that I've had, there are still days that I have thoughts of not being good enough. Seriously. And it happens more often than you think. But it comes down to, okay, well, how are you going to respond to those thoughts versus how you're going to react to them? That matters. So like one of the biggest things that I'm working on now, I told you a bunch of stories today, but one of the biggest things, I actually hired a communications coach because I want to become more confident in my story, right? It's an ever, evolving, I think, concept. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to and can develop, is being confident in who they are, their past, the things they've been through, and the way they think. Plain and simple. Like, one of the biggest things for me was letting go of listening to my brain all too often. Like, I think as PTs, we get into this, mindset, we're very logical, rational thinkers. But taking the time to actually listen to your heart and to your gut, I think, are far more important and far more valuable and far more relatable as well. So it does help you build that connection that we touched on earlier. So it is an ever evolving process, and we all struggle at some point with it, and that's something that I'm currently working on with the help of others. And I think that is another very important piece of value that needs to come out there, is like, ask for fucking help. It's okay to ask for help. That is the biggest thing that I had to do in 2020 at the beginning of this, was actually let go of my ego and be able to ask for help and be open to it, right? Because you can't do it all on your own. You have to let go of control sometimes, and it's okay to do that. It really is. And then once you can be okay with that, guess what? The weight on your shoulders gets lifted, and you get this giant relief that you actually are supported by others around you, and we do all have each other's best interests in heart.
Yeah, so powerful. I appreciate you sharing that, being vulnerable with that. Cause I think, like I said, guys in general, and girls as well, but guys especially wait for, it's like, well, they see that and it's like, well, I'm not in the situation to do that. Or I'll wait till I'm confident. I'll wait till I get that much money, and then I'll start being confident. It's a dangerous place to be, and it doesn't happen.
Take massive action now. Take massive action now. That's what we need to be doing. There's no time better than the very present moment to make a fucking decision. Yep. Especially from a masculinity standpoint. Like, teaser for you guys out there, women appreciate that. That's what makes you a man. Be decisive, take action.
Yeah, so good, man. And last hypothetical question for all the guests here is, so you're in town, you're leaving your favorite coffee shop, you're bumping your younger self. So younger Matt, 10 years back. And I know we've already heard the story of Matt 10 years ago to some degree, but you're on your way to a busy day with clients. You can't miss it. You got 60 seconds to talk with him. He's asking for some life advice, looking for some guidance. What are you saying to him?
One of the things that I wish I did in my younger years was actually learn less and act more. And that kind of falls along into what we just talked about, taking massive action, because, as students and as continual learners, I think, fall into a trap of continually burying our head in a book, or, looking on Instagram and trying to learn the next best thing. But then once again, we never apply it, right? We never take action on it. So I really, really wish that I would have told myself back then to just, okay, use what you've got now and go experience it more. Like work with more people, communicate with more people. Don't spend so many nights, staying up till 9, 10 o'clock at night studying. And essentially I was antisocial for a lot of it, just because I was the guy that wanted to get all the straight A's on the tests, and I was capable by doing it. But then, you put me in a situation I couldn't really act on it very well until I got to PT school and realized that, oh yeah, we need to communicate with people. That's where all the magic happens. So do more, learn less.
I love it. And I think you end up figuring a lot of that out on your own though, because you're making a big impact out there, and you're coaching people, you're helping the people, directly, as well as helping other coaches do that as well. So where can people find you? I know you have a lot of remote and online things going on now too, both for people looking to improve fitness, improve their health, improve their movement, and also for the coaches out there. So you want to give a little background on where you're at?
Yeah, sure. So if you actually want to learn a little bit more about my philosophy of things, I've wrote a bunch of articles over at powerathletehq.com. So that's where I house a lot of my articles on there on various concepts, from everything on the feet to the pain sciences and communication, and working with athletes. But then my website is rootedinmovement.com, and movement is an acronym. It's capital MVMNT. It stands for Movement, Vitality, Mindset, Nutrition, and Training. And then my Instagram handle is at Rooted in Movement, with the same acronym. And that's where I respond a lot more, I guess, frequently than through the website or through email. So if you really want to have a conversation, I'm more than open to having discussion on that platform. But yeah, I do offer a lot of remote training, remote assessments and evaluations, and long-term programming for people who really do want to work through a pain experience or improve their performance, and most importantly, improve and reattain confidence in their bodies.
Yeah, highly recommend engaging with him. I love your Instagram handle and the profile, and your content's always great. So definitely go check him out. We'll link all those up in the show notes as well. Matt, it's been a blast, man. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and for sharing all this with everyone listening. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. This has been wonderful. We got to do it again soon for sure.
Yeah, we will. All right, man. Appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.